Katie LaFalcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's our Saturday book. We're continuing. This is number 6 of Opus by Gareth Gore, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside Catholic Church. A little light reading for a Saturday morning. Let's just continue. This is hard to get through. I have to tell you, this is one of the most difficult books that I've read for our Saturday books. And it's difficult because each story is convoluted. It's like a spider web. And it's just so corrupt. I can't believe it. It is so corrupt. And I don't think I have to say alleged. I think it's painfully obvious. So chapter 9, Cloak and Dagger. And before I even start this, I want to remind you that, 3 years ago, I did a whole book, a Saturday book, on Robert Hansen, the FBI spy. So we're going to talk about him again. He was FBI agent and Opus Dei, and his wife came from a long family line of Opus Dei. Bob was holier than thou. He was a pill. He was a homophobe. He was anti-communist. He was a proselytizer. He was very high in the elite of Opus Dei, and also Virginia, Washington, D.C. Elite in the church. In February of 2001, he was arrested by the FBI and the CIA for spying. His wife Bonnie told them that thought he might have been doing it since 1979. Might have. She caught him with a document and took him to the Opus Dei priest, who told him, "Turn yourself in," but then called the Hansen family, the next morning early to say, my bad, don't turn yourself in. Give money to charity. I could suggest a really good charity for you, Opus Dei. And was this advice to prevent Opus Dei from being caught up in this big spy scandal and looking bad? Over the next 20 years, Hansen became the most notorious double agent in U.S. history. After his arrest, Opus Dei went into self-protection mode to disavow any knowledge. They wanted deniability, and because Hansen's donations went through Opus Dei nonprofits, they had that deniability. He got more than $600,000 from the Russians. And that money, they couldn't track it down, what happened to it. Opus Dei tried to to claim that he was taking money from, tried to prevent charges that they were taking money from him. 10 years after the beatification of Escrivá, Opus Dei was growing because it embraced people's conservative agenda at the time. Remember the time period. The Pope had recently made Opus Dei a bishop, given Opus Dei bishop to Denver. And he often had to defend Opus Dei, as in it's not a sect. The first Opus Dei bishop in the U.S. was this guy in Denver. Opus Dei in Washington, D.C. was increasing in money and influence. It just got a donation of $10 million from a power company that's founder for Opus Dei bought 844 acres in the Shenandoah Mountains for retreats. This was called Longley Conference Center. They delayed the blessing of the New York headquarters because it coincided with the scheduled news release of Hansen's indictment, 21 counts. The story broke weeks later. Books were written. But actually linking Opus Dei and complicity. This is New York Times headlines. Wife says suspect told a priest 20 years ago of aiding the Soviets. This priest, reporters got a hold of him, and he confirmed he'd known them in the 80s. But then he wrote a statement saying that he didn't discuss what he did in the way of spiritual guidance with anybody. I can't talk about that spy. He went to confession. All the elite members became suspect in the media. If anybody found out you were Opus Dei, they looked at you differently. And that included Louis Freed, head of the FBI, Justice Scalia. And here's the thing. Opus Dei members are not required to make public the fact that they are Opus Dei members. And for some, it's a detriment to their career. And for others, it's positive. And it is highly variable depending on the circumstances of your job. So some high-placed people don't want anyone to know that they've got this very conservative, traditional, right-wing connection. Scalia, as a justice of the Supreme Court, is supposed to play it cool when it comes to stuff like this. At least in the old days, that was true. Louis Freeh, on the other hand, kind of did a big show. He had a gaggle of little boys, and he was the good Catholic, upstanding, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. type FBI agent, squeaky clean, cute life, lots of little boys, and just the image of what you would want an FBI agent to be. And membership in Opus Dei gave him a little bit more, starch in his persona. So the headquarters in New York, costing $70 million, opened rather quietly. They felt like their ambitions in the United States have been squelched, compromised. Catholic voters had helped Bush to win. So now he was going after stem cells because that's what they wanted him to do. But the big debate in the White House was, look, this is pragmatic science and it's potential breakthroughs in research. And then the other argument was, but it's a political strategy. We have to appeal to the Catholics who voted for us. And this became a big public fight. And, with the church taking its side, we all know what they think about that. Opus Dei said that they supported a culture of life. And now they'd found this stem cell research and abortion issue. So they decided to hang their hat on it. And they formed a group of pro-life advocates, doctors, academics, professors, medical advisors. And they tried to appear serious and scholarly, but it was just a sensationalist publicity machine from the very beginning. On C-SPAN, they denied that they were religious-based. They claimed to be just a few people, who love Jesus. They didn't mention Opus Dei, which they all belong to. They claimed a website was covering religious truths from all religions. But it spewed things like pseudoscience, disinformation, dystopian visions of a liberal society because of allowing abortion and euthanasia. They called society with these laws that allowed it the culture of death. They had slurs against Gore, not this Gore, either the vice president. And they had homophobic comments on their website. January of 2002, at the Pontifical University of Holy Cross, founded by Portillo, the university had huge financial losses. So it was in a huge old palace that took 200 people to run. It's just something else. Priests got trained there for Opus Dei, their own brand of priest, and then sent globally to influence everybody with more Opus Dei influence. Opus Dei paid to train them, and was able to get approval of bishops for them. They basically bought the approval of the bishops. They put Opus Dei in a position of authority about canon law. Nobody really questioned it, because how would you even know to ask, you know? The numeraries there often asked for advice, often were asked for advice by the Holy See. So like the Pope was actually developing these trusted relationships with these Opus Dei characters. Eventually, the university, its dean of canon law, joined the Vatican Supreme Court as a secretary. So now the group head and the secretary were both Opus Dei for this group on canon law. So in January of 2002, they were planning a celebration of 100 years of the founder's life, and it was going to be held at this university. They centered Opus Dei, by doing that, in importance in the eyes of all Catholics and Vatican influence. And it was the beginning of a whole year of worldwide celebration. They were making a huge thing out of this. 5 days in Rome, the kickoff. There would be a documentary made on his life, commemorative stamps produced, and an audience with the Pope for members of Opus Dei who showed up and donated. Speaking was Rick Santorum, U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania, the third senior Republican in the Republican Party at the time, and he was paid a speaking fee by Opus Dei. He claimed he was on an official trip for the U.S. Senate. The conference had much blurring of faith, politics, and public life. Santorum echoed and repeated views of most of the speakers there. Opus Dei had to use positions in society to shape public policy, and it was absurd to check your Catholicism at the door if you were a leader. One might argue that if you were the kind of person that could not separate those things, then the least appropriate career for you would be in the leadership of a secular country with a constitution that allows for freedom from religious oppression. Anyway, Santorum made a public statement saying, and I quote, "Blessed Jose Maria guides my way." Now he's saying that his political decisions are made by this dead Opus Dei priest. He spoke about disliking Kennedy, John Kennedy, for not using his religion and for saying that he was not taking orders from the Catholic Church. Santorum called this the corruption of freedom of conscience. McCloskey was thrilled. His efforts had captured people of influence. He was close to the Pope. Then, dun, 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 the Boston Globe church scandal broke. This was a church cover-up, systematic abuse in Boston and elsewhere for decades. Hundreds of victims. And it just highlights the endemic culture of concealment and suppression, the protected predators. McCloskey downplayed all of it as a liberal plot threatening church and society. He blamed all of this on active homosexuals, not the ones who go after the young. The plot to advocate abrogation of priestly celibacy from, liberals, and the ordination of women. So in order to get rid of celibacy and to ordain women, they faked this whole thing. McCloskey was postured as last line of defense of a church that was being besieged by liberals. They paraded him out to make statements. He said, the church is not run by opinion polls. It's not a Chinese menu. He said, you have to assent to all the truths of the Catholic Church and what it teaches if you're a Catholic. He liked the celebrity. He kind of liked being under scrutiny, even though it was embarrassing. Hudson discovered that McCloskey had broken the seal of confession. And Hudson discovered that this was an Opus Dei technique to control members. He was horrified. But nevertheless, the numbers were increasing in D.C. They didn't see the violation of the confessional, the targeting of children, or the trafficking of numerary assistants. Echeverria strengthened Escriva's instructions. Portillo's Vade Mecum, that was his writing, that was the answer to Escriva, making all of his information even more strict. And then Echeverria's own thoughts. It was all presented as a collection of tips and observations, but they were authoritarian directives, especially what was called manifestations of conscience. In other words, telling your sins and the details of your life to your spiritual director and then giving them directly to headquarters. Canon law forbade this, and the Opus Dei ignored it. This was an essential tool of control for them. It was presented as a sincere chat with the instruments of God, the directors, the instruments of God. They have the mission of forming us. This rhetoric is just too much. And the advice, that they receive, it's not optimal, not optional. It comes from Jesus when these priests give them advice. October of 2002 was the canonization. There were 300,000 attendees, many students having been given tickets. Now the founder was a saint, but the two biggest benefactors of Opus Dei were both dying, the Pope and Luis. And there were more blows to come. Chapter 10, The Albino Assassin, New York, January 2003. Brian Finnerty was a PR guy for Opus Dei. He was highly placed. He was their communication director. He freaked out when he heard about the publication of the Da Vinci Code, when he read this little tidbit. Full disclosure, I read the Da Vinci Code, but I never saw the movie. I decided this weekend to watch it to refresh my memory, but they wanted me to pay, so I couldn't watch it. Okay, what keeps this? Okay, this is a line in a review. What keeps this Baroque conceit from collapsing is the way Brown, the author, grounds it in historical facts about Da Vinci's life, along with two actual secret societies, the Priory of Zion, a pagan brotherhood to which Da Vinci belonged, and a contemporary Vatican-sanctioned Christian sect called Opus Dei. They went crazy. The scandal of Hansen, the spy, finally was starting to die down, and this book was just a gigantic PR nightmare. Finnerty hoped to be able to be working on the beatification of Portillo now, and he vowed that he would, turn Portillo into a saint. Then this book shows up, and he viewed it as a PR crisis. He had read a bound galley from eBay that somebody had been sent ahead of publishing. The book was fiction, but it began with some nonfiction, just to give it a little oomph. A special fact section. The Vatican prelature, known as Opus Dei, is a deeply devout Catholic sect that has been the topic of recent controversy due to reports of brainwashing, coercion, and a dangerous practice known as corporal mortification. Brown mentioned the Hansen spy scandal, Opus Dei buyouts of the Vatican Bank, thirst for power, medieval views on women. I mean, he just let them have it. The main villain in the book was an escaped convict turned numerary, turned assassin for Opus Dei to kill members of a rival sect. He was a zealot for Opus Dei. Finnerty was exempt from Opus Dei media censorship, a thing in Chicago since medieval times in the 60s. This is the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, which is the index of prohibited books. Escrivá kept this list, even though Vatican had stopped doing it. This is the Opus Dei media censorship. And he kept it up to date. And its idea was to keep members in the dark about any criticism against the group. Access to the news was also controlled. Like, papers were censored. You'd get a paper in a residence and it would have things cut out or blacked out. Members never heard anything negative about Opus Dei. The heads of Opus Dei called this whole situation religious persecution. Tom Bolin, a former teacher of Hanson's brother-in-law, he had been given the job of keeping Opus Dei out of the spy scandal. He was now in New York, and he was asked by Finnerty about the book. Bolin was hard case Opus Dei. He left law school in Chicago to teach for Opus Dei. He just left law school to go, well, you want me to teach little kids? Okay. And he gave up law. He became an administrator for the Midwest Opus Dei boys groups. He was sent to Rome, and this impressed the Pope. He was told that the Pope wants you to be a priest. He didn't want to be a priest, but the Pope wanted him to be a priest. Numeraries could not decide for themselves to be Opus Dei priests. They were selected, and it was a big deal. Dutifully, he did it, and he became a priest at the age of 43. He was made part of Echeverri's personal staff. He was sent to the United States as regional vicar, which is the most senior Opus Dei guy in the U.S. Echeverri worried about the low vocation numbers. They'd only had 5,000 signers up in 8 years. He didn't ask why young people were not as interested. They didn't try to figure out what was going on. They focused on ratcheting up the false propaganda about how great it was doing. Opus Dei is doing so great. Creating an image of expansion. They spent millions on 2 universities in Spain and Rome, but they were called universities, not serious academic establishments. There was no work done. They reinforced the cult of personality. They embellished personal accounts of ordinary members to hype their public image. They just were a big PR move. Bolin fell for the image. And he told Finnerty the Da Vinci Code was not a threat. It's just a zany book, he told him. Nobody will ever buy it. Famous last words. Opus Dei was horrified at the popularity of the book. One day, one of them was walking down the street, the main Barnes & Noble branch, and looked in the window, and the entire front window was all Da Vinci Code. The 10,000 advanced copies were sent out. Then Dan Brown went on a promo tour, not an author tour, a promotional tour. There were tons of ads. They did a Crack the Code online contest. They did then a 6-city author tour. Then it was published in March of 2003. The New York Times review started with one word: wow. It's just too funny. They called it a blockbuster perfection. It was #1 bestseller the first week, and after 6 months of intense media attention, investigation, and negative press for Opus Dei said, oh, it's all lies, fake news. They said, notwithstanding marketing, pretensions to authentic scholarship, distorts the historical record, gives a wholly unrealistic portrayal, numerous inaccuracies, factual errors, false depictions, absurd nonsense. They managed only to fan the flames into a feeding frenzy. Former members went all over the media. People that were disgruntled with Opus Dei, this was their chance, and they were all over the media. CNN, Anderson Cooper, did a whole series on secret societies, did a segment on Opus Dei, and one of the numeraries that was interviewed called Opus Dei cult-like. Opus Dei demanded that Sony not use the name of Opus Dei in the movie. They were making a movie, and they just ignored him. Opus Dei was an object of ridicule, derision, scrutiny. Even there was an episode of The Sopranos where one mobster was angry with his wife, who was an Opus Dei supernumerary, and put an Opus Dei medal in the casket of his dead father. And he wasn't Opus Dei. His father didn't like Opus Dei, and he had a fit. And the message was, even mobsters are ashamed to be associated with Opus Dei. So then there was a new scandal. Accusations of behavior by McCloskey. Again, accusations made by a woman he counseled. When she confronted him, she said, he absolved her of her sins. She went to a different priest, and he told Bolin. And Bolin did a farcical investigation. It was sweep it under the rug. McCloskey wasn't dealt with. It was swept under the carpet. He just reminded McCloskey to do some spiritual direction in the confessional and not in the office. She was shocked to hear him bragging on interviews, McCloskey. He says on this interview, I am a salesman for the church. I'm into helping transform people into serious Christians. The only way we're going to transform society and culture is to have believing, prayerful, scripture reading, sacramental Catholics who, with their own drive and energy, will have an enormous impact on entertainment, the arts, music, culture, and politics. You know, the Seven Mountains. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. So she threatened a lawsuit at the time of this whole Da Vinci thing. The Opus Dei, they infiltrated the higher-ups of power in the United States. They didn't need this. They had, Justice Scalia in their back pocket. They had the biggest Opus Dei community in the country in Washington, D.C. They had status even after Hansen the Spy, who was Opus Dei, and Opus Dei's role in the cover-up. Opus Dei was upset that Bush had wavered about stem cells. He'd given the green light for scientific research on already discarded embryos. The Culture of Life Foundation was now led by Austin Ruse, heavily into the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, where Leonard Leo was on its board. Leonard Leo, his ugly head is risen now. We're never going to get him back under his rock. He was the vice president of the Federalist Society and a White House advisor, and not yet 40 years old. And you should look him up. He dresses like Beau Brummel. McCloskey was not involved. He had been sent to London out of legal reach. It was said he went for psychological help and had issues and wasn't going to be writing. Nothing could be farther from the truth. He got busy with the Catholic community in London and in Parliament. He started leading retreats, and he was interviewed on the news. In 2004, the first National Catholic Breakfast was held. It was a big success. It was noticeable, though, that McCloskey wasn't there. He claimed publicly that he took a sabbatical to write a book, and then he told people he was above the law and shielded by Opus Dei and not held accountable. He went to CNN to talk about the faith of John Kerry. Opus Dei got the Archbishop in London to let McCloskey work in London. In Opus Dei, there was a taboo that you couldn't challenge its operating methods because Escrivá was given a vision of Opus Dei from God, and therefore it was infallible. To question Opus Dei was to question God. Therefore, there was an expectation of blind justice, no dissent. After Escrivá died, it behooved his successors to protect their power and their autonomy without distorting Escrivá's work. After he was canonized, Opus Dei was untouchable. Meanwhile, those in the Via Tavera in Rome saw the problems, and they worked hard to protect the Opus Dei from fallout. Opus Dei distanced itself legally and financially from the work that the different members were doing in 62 countries on its behalf. The work done was instruction from Villa Trevera, but they had layers of hands-off deniability to hide their involvement. Opus Dei was just giving spiritual advice. The money they gave Opus Dei was just voluntary donations. The means of acquiring the money fell to local members, a false image of local communities motivated and inspired by Escrivá's teaching is what they were presenting. Really, it was these communities getting pressure from central God, in Rome, and forcing them by all sorts of psychological and fear tactics. The truth was trusted higher numeraries did all of this stuff from direct instruction from the superiors who denied an involvement, all in their name, their own name, but the decisions to do it were from Opus Dei. They were all required to sign letters relinquishing ownership of their businesses in case they ran afoul of Opus Dei headquarters, put all the liability on the individual numeraries, and legal immunity for Opus Dei. This is just, such a betrayal. If Opus Dei didn't own or control anything, it wouldn't do anything, it could not do anything wrong. This was their main talking point. So the Da Vinci Code was correct. Opus Dei would protect itself no matter what. For 5 decades, loyal numeraries had hijacked the Banco Popular, the jewel in Opus Dei's crown, and Opus Dei had $1 billion stake in the Banco. But there was no proof on paper. The bank individuals did everything in relationship to money, the bank, and Opus Dei as I. They never associated themselves with Opus Dei as we. Opus's stake in all these shell companies and foundations it was like Russian nesting dolls. Each company was independent, but they were all owned. All of them owned a stake in the Banco. Also, on close scrutiny, the same board members and shareholders were in every single one of these things. They all donated huge money to Opus Dei. There was $100 million network a year. It was used for Opus Dei recruitment. $100 million a year. Good God. Luis directed all the charitable donations from the Banco to one foundation or another, and then that money went to Opus Dei. Tens of millions of dollars were collected along the path to Opus Dei. Luis kept his promise to liberate Opus Dei from financial worries. Remember, he had promised that once a long time ago. Suddenly, as when we started the book, now we got the background, now we're going back. Suddenly, in early 2000s, the system was threatened with collapse. Luis was ill. Other executives got ambitious and hoped to get rid of him. Many didn't care about the OD links. They just wanted, power. In 2002, a guy called the Terminator, the bank's chief executive, was given a job by Luis to take on the unions, and they plotted a coup. He plotted a coup with one large shareholder. This would have cut the flowing of money from Opus Dei. A protege of Luis's, Angel Ron told Luis and the Terminator, Angel Ron was a whistleblower to Luis, and he told Luis about the Terminator. The Terminator was fired, and Ron was put in his place. The largest shareholder of the bank got furious because they'd been outmaneuvered by a 75-year-old man. Luis was shaken. He was losing control of the power that protected Opus Dei interests. He had no choice but to stay on the board to fight off this large shareholder. He tried to appoint another Opus Dei guy to the board. He looked for Opus Dei friendly investors. He sent his brother Javier to court Portuguese billionaire. Banco bought his bank, the billionaires, and he became one of their largest investors, which was crucial support for Opus Dei. At the end of 2003, betrayal. Longtime Luis close friend Jesus Platero had downgraded his position in Opus Dei to get married, but he was still a faithful Opus Dei guy in the 70s and 80s. He had worked for 25 years on the Banco board, but he, of all people, launched a bid to replace Luis, allying with an insurance company and a big shareholder. Luis was distraught. He had Ron fire the traitor. Platero had to be taken to the hospital. Luis went to hunt for other threats. He oversaw what was essentially a night of the long knives. If you're familiar with German history, it was when Hitler, it was longer than one night, but one night especially, he had Erich Röhm, the head of the SA, and all sorts of people killed to sort of thin out the competition. Luis fired 11 board members, put his close ally on the board, a guy called Paco, as the general secretary. The reaction was bad. One large shareholder sold $400 million stake in the bank right away. In June of 2004, Luis's disastrous speech that we talked about at the beginning, where he got up and he couldn't even talk, at the annual shareholders meeting, that happened. And it was really obvious at that point he was unwell and needed to be replaced. Ron and Javier together were named co-chairs, but Opus Dei, they weren't Opus Dei, but they were familiar with Banco's relationship with Opus Dei. They were cool with it. Luis thought that this would avoid numeraries having blind obedience to Rome. So he wanted the influence, but he didn't want the obedience. In October, he resigned. By summer of 2005, he was housebound at 79. He had lost all independence, and he had become subject to the watchful eye of the directors of the residence for the first time ever because he couldn't get out. The control and manipulation now also applied to him. But his friends were allowed to visit, so no one outside the residence would realize how bad it was for him. Javier realized that he was being kept away from his brother, Luis. When he called Luis, he was always told he's asleep, he's too sick, he needs his rest, he can't come to the phone, the doctor's with him. He feared that Luis was being told that he, Javier, was turning on Luis. Why would Opus Dei want to keep his most trusted confidant away from Luis? What were they afraid of? Javier suspected that to let Opus Dei hang on to Luis's assets and to not let him change his will. That's what they were afraid of. So then he got messages ostensibly from Luis ordering him to leave the chairmanship job, to do a friendly natural exit, and you can be honorary chair. It's okay. Where did this come from? There was a secret plan to ignore the secession plan of Luis. That's where it came from. A plan to prevent the money from all going to Rome. They were starting a battle to consolidate Opus Dei interests in the bank. It was a takeover. A takeover by another bank would increase the share prices, and Opus Dei would cash out and get a ton of money. I couldn't have this job. It's too confusing. But A takeover would cut off donations, and it risked exposing other Opus Dei Banco arrangements. Many financial tentacles of a questionable nature were all connected to Opus Dei: rents, loans, mortgages, debts. Opus Dei got Luis to agree to change the strategy. Luis was in terrible shape, but Opus Dei got him to manipulate the board members to swap shares to a company that would consolidate all interests in the Bank of Opus Dei. And he told, as Luis told the people doing this, do it, whether you know it's illegal or not. Do it because you're loyal. So they began to merge holdings under an umbrella shell company, the European Union of Investments, which was described as a real estate vehicle. It was a front. They spent $380 million more of the Banco's shares and money from foundations that were used to protect Opus Dei, and they didn't go to the social programs that they purported to be for. And the goal was to get a block of Opus Dei allied shareholders who would hold 20% of the bank and defend against a takeover. But Luis died February 25th of 2006. A few days later, the Opus Dei men in the Banco moved against Javier, accused him of a secret meeting with other banks, which he denied, told him to move along, and they dismantled his office. They disabled his security clearance, and that night he showed up and he couldn't get in. There was a shouting match in the lobby. He gave up. He conceded defeat. He was bitter and betrayed by a bank he'd worked for 40 years. He lost his bodyguard, he lost his driver, and he began to fear for his safety. He flew to London. He got the Spanish ambassador, who was a high-up guy in Opus Dei, to tell the Via Trevere that Javier had put incriminating documents in a Swiss savings account, and that would come out if anything happened to him. Then he sold his shares, and he lived in the Alps happily ever after. In Rome, Opus Dei was still upset by the upcoming Da Vinci movie. They have a lot going on right now. They had a communication crisis workshop. They called it Operation Lemonade. When Ron Howard said that the movie would be faithful to the book, they said, okay, well, we've got lemons, let's make lemonade. The plan was to characterize the movie as an affront to all Christians. Ignore the brainwashing, the coercion, the misogyny, and focus on Jesus's relationship with Mary Magdalene. It provided interviews with real Opus Dei members, this PR program. They gave media tours of the New York headquarters, nice and shiny and new. And right before the premiere of the movie, they did an MSNBC show with Chris Matthews. It was a huge apologetic PR scheme to make Opus Dei look transparent, not threatening. There are no monks in Opus Dei. This was their argument. No monks in Opus Dei, albino or otherwise. We don't engage in corporal mortification. That's a grotesque portrayal. There's a spirit of sacrifice. We do engage in that. It's a long time tradition in the Catholic Church, not just something singular to Opus Dei. There's no mention of the $1 million settlement with the McCloskey's victim. There was no mention of her non-disclosure agreement. There was no mention of the life control by Opus Dei on the numerary assistants. There's no Catholic who believes the worst about Opus Dei. He said people like thrillers, but some just want to kick the church while it's down. He was asked, why did you Opus Dei let us in to interview you? And the answer was, the movie gives us the opportunity to get our message out. We're making lemonade. Opus Dei saw the need to control the message going in and out from the group. And they realized the book and movie could have broken the silence of the members and broken their control of Opus Dei. But then then there was Father McCloskey. He did an interview for a documentary. And, you know, he's trying to be apologetic about his legal problems. He said, God's mercy is much greater than our sexual sins. This was an interview for a documentary aimed at helping Catholics become marriage material. He said, it's just like getting a wound or getting cut on your arm or your leg. There could be a big scar, but over the course of time, perhaps the scar gradually disappears. You never know it even happened. That can also be the case with sexual sins. By presenting itself as a bulwark of Catholic tradition and any attacks against it as an onslaught against the church and religion in general, Opus Dei hoped to make its own scars disappear. And that's the end of that chapter. We're stopping a little short, but it's a lot to digest. So that's the end of video number 6. We will start video number 7 next. Start with chapter 11. So it's a lot. I know it's a lot. It's hard to listen to. And that's not the worst of it. We'll talk about the worst of it later. Thank you for watching. Slán go bhfuil. Slánte.